The words hang in the air between us, heavy and sharp like shattered glass. "You'll never survive without me," Mark's voice, usually so smooth, so confident when he's charming clients or dismissing my thoughts, is laced with a cold, triumphant cruelty. His lips curl into a smirk, his eyes, the ones I once thought held galaxies, now just reflect the sterile white of the minimalist kitchen he designed, the kitchen I never quite felt was mine. Survive. The word itself is a judgment, a pronouncement of my inadequacy. My breath catches, a tiny, insignificant sound in the face of his booming certainty. I feel small, like a child being scolded, yet something inside me, something I thought had withered long ago, flickers, a spark of defiance, cold and hard. He sees the flicker, I think, because his smirk widens, mistaking it for the last gasp of a dying flame. He turns, expecting me to crumble, to beg, to prove him right. The scent of his expensive cologne, the one that always made my head spin with a mixture of desire and unease, fills my lungs one last time before he walks away, the click of his Italian leather shoes on the polished marble floor echoing like a judge's gavel. Survive. We'll see about that, Mark. We'll just see. If you've ever felt that chilling dismissal, that feeling of being utterly underestimated, tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It means more than you can imagine, helping these stories find their voice. Our life, before the shattering, had the glossy veneer of a magazine spread. A sprawling house in the suburbs, 2 cars in the driveway, his a sleek, aggressive sports car, mine a sensible, family-friendly SUV I rarely drove anywhere exciting. Mark was the sun around which our little universe revolved. Mark Benson, founder and CEO of Benson Holdings, a portfolio of diverse, thriving businesses he'd built from the ground up, or so he always claimed. He was charming, dynamic, a whirlwind of ambition and charisma. And I was his wife, Sarah. The quiet one, the supportive one, the one who made sure his home life ran as smoothly as his boardroom meetings. I organized the dinner parties where he wooed investors, remembered the birthdays of his important contacts, kept the chaos of daily life from touching the hem of his perfectly tailored suits. I'd had dreams once, small, flickering embers of ambition. A little art studio, perhaps, or a desire to go back to school for art history. But Mark's dreams were so much bigger, so much louder. They'd simply eclipsed mine. Later, Sarah, when things are more settled, he'd say, a gentle pat on my hand, his eyes already on the next big deal. And later never came. I managed the household accounts with a meticulousness that would have surprised him had he ever bothered to look. He provided the funds, a generous allowance deposited monthly, and I stretched it, invested small portions, always ensuring there was a cushion. He called it my little hobby money, chuckled when I showed him my spreadsheets. Cute, he'd said, a dismissive wave of his hand. He never saw the hours I spent, the careful planning. He only saw the seamless surface. My world was one of soft edges and muted colors, a backdrop for his vibrant, explosive success. I told myself I was content. I told myself his achievements were mine too, by proxy. But sometimes, late at night, when the house was silent and he was away on another business trip, I'd wander into the spare room I'd once fantasized was my studio. I'd run my fingers over the dusty canvas I'd bought years ago, the paints still sealed in their tubes. A quiet ache would settle in my chest, a longing for something I couldn't quite name, or perhaps was too afraid to. I loved him, or at least I loved the man I thought he was in the beginning, the one who saw a spark in me, who listened, whose laughter didn't have that edge of superiority. But somewhere along the way, that man had been replaced by this monument to success, this cold edifice of ambition, and I had become just another one of his well-managed assets. I think, deep down, I always knew this foundation was built on something fragile, something that could crack under the right pressure. I just never imagined I'd be the one to see it happen, or that his casual cruelty would be the hammer. The inciting incident, the moment the glossy veneer finally cracked, wasn't a dramatic explosion, but a quiet, almost pathetic, whimper.
It was a Tuesday.
Mark was home, a rare occurrence. He'd been agitated for weeks, pacing, snapping, his phone practically glued to his ear. I'd learned to tread carefully during these moods, to make myself smaller, less visible. He was in his study, the door ominously closed. I'd made him coffee, the way he liked it, dark and bitter, just like his mood. I knocked softly. "What?" he barked, not even looking up from his laptop when I entered. I placed the cup on his vast mahogany desk, careful not to disturb the mountains of paperwork. "Mark," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "I was thinking, remember that art course I mentioned? The one at the community college?" His head snapped up, his eyes narrowed. "An art course? Now? Are you serious, Sarah?" The contempt in his voice was a physical blow. "I just thought, with things being so stressful for you, maybe it would be good for me to have something for myself." It sounded so lame, so insignificant, even to my own ears. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, deliberate movement, his gaze raking over me as if seeing me for the first time and finding me utterly wanting. "Something for yourself?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Sarah, your something is this. This house. This life. The life I provide. You think you can just, what? Dabble in paints while Rome burns?" I didn't understand the Rome burns comment then. I just felt the sting of his derision. "It's not dabbling, Mark. It's something I've always wanted to," he cut me off. "What you want is irrelevant right now. What I need is support. Silence. Not distractions." He stood then, towering over me. "I'm dealing with serious issues here, business issues you wouldn't understand in a million years. The market's volatile. There are complications." He gestured vaguely, impatiently. "And you're talking about finger painting?" The unfairness of it, the casual dismissal of my one small request, pricked at me. "It's not finger painting, Mark. And maybe if you talked to me, I could understand. Maybe I could help. It was a mistake." His face darkened. "Help? You? How, Sarah? By offering me tea and sympathy? By telling me which shade of blue best captures my impending financial ruin?" Financial ruin? The words hit me like a splash of icy water. This was new. He'd always been invincible, untouchable. What do you mean?" I stammered. He threw his hands up in exasperation. "Never mind. It's beyond you. Just stay out of my way. Don't add to my problems." And then he delivered the line, the one that would become the anthem of my eventual liberation, though at the time it felt like a death sentence. He was leaving. Not just the room, but me. He said the stress was too much, that he needed to focus, that I was a liability he could no longer afford, emotionally, or, he implied, financially. And when I stood there, mute, shattered, trying to process the wreckage of my world, that's when he delivered his parting shot, the one I'd already replayed in my mind 1,000 times. "You'll never survive without me." He packed a bag, his movements efficient, cold. He didn't look at me again. The front door slammed shut, and the silence that descended was absolute, crushing. Survive. The word echoed in the empty rooms, mocking me. The first few days were a blur of disbelief and a gnawing, hollow fear. The house, once a symbol of our shared life, now felt like a mausoleum, each room echoing with his pronouncements of my inadequacy. His words, "You'll never survive without me," played on a loop in my head, a cruel soundtrack to my sudden solitude. Survive.
How?
I wandered through the silent rooms, his scent still lingering on his side of the bed, in his closet filled with suits I'd meticulously cared for. The sensible SUV, my car, sat in the driveway, a stark reminder of my contained existence. Where would I even go? My little hobby money, as he called it, the carefully managed household account, suddenly seemed pitifully small against the backdrop of what I imagined life alone would cost. He'd always handled the major finances, the mortgages, the investments that funded our lifestyle. I had access to our joint checking, but the savings, the stocks, the real wealth, that was all under his name, his control. I tried calling him. His phone went straight to voicemail, his voice, smooth and professional. "You've reached Mark Benson. Please leave a message." It was the same voicemail he used for business, detached, impersonal. I was no longer special enough for a personal rejection. Panic began to set in, cold and sharp. I looked at my reflection, a pale, tired woman with fear in her eyes. Was he right? Was I just a well-kept pet, incapable of fending for myself in the wild? The thought was a bitter pill. I'd spent years sublimating my own needs, my own desires, for his. I'd believed it was a partnership, but now I saw it for what it was, a dictatorship, benevolent at times, but a dictatorship nonetheless. My first attempt to assert myself was pathetically small. I decided to use the main household account, the one he usually topped up, to pay some upcoming bills. The card was declined. Declined. A cold dread washed over me. I called the bank. After an eternity on hold, a polite but firm voice informed me that Mr. Benson had put a freeze on all joint assets, pending adjustments. He was already dismantling our life, locking me out, ensuring his prophecy of my failure would come true. The shame was a burning coal in my stomach. I, who prided myself on my meticulous record-keeping, my careful management of my allowance, was now cut off, adrift. His cruelty was efficient, calculated. He wasn't just leaving me, he was crippling me. The challenges mounted with a terrifying speed. The polite bank notifications turned into overdue notices with bold red lettering. The electricity bill, the gas, the mortgage on the house. I now wandered like a ghost. Each envelope felt like another nail in the coffin of my old life. Mark, true to his word, remained unreachable. My messages went unanswered. My emails, if he even read them, received no reply. It was as if I had ceased to exist for him, except as a problem to be systematically erased. I tried reaching out to the few friends we shared, but they were his friends, really. Their wives, women I'd hosted at countless dinner parties, offered sympathetic but distant murmurs. Mark is under a lot of pressure, one said, her voice laced with an unspoken loyalty to the man who signed her husband's paychecks. He'll sort it out, dear. He always does. They didn't see me. They saw Mark's discarded wife. The isolation was a heavy blanket, suffocating. I started selling things. Small pieces of jewelry he'd given me, gifts from anniversaries and birthdays that now felt tainted. A silver locket from my grandmother, something purely mine, I couldn't bring myself to part with. The money I got was a pittance, barely enough to keep the lights on for another week, to buy groceries that I ate alone in the vast, silent kitchen. One afternoon, I found a stack of his old business magazines in the study. His face beamed from one of the covers. Mark Benson. The Midas touch. I traced the outline of his confident smile, a smile that now seemed predatory. I started reading, not about his successes, but about the industries he was in, the jargon he used, the intricate web of companies under the Benson Holdings umbrella. It was like learning a foreign language, dense and confusing, but a tiny part of me, the part that used to meticulously balance spreadsheets, found a strange, detached interest in it. He'd always said I wouldn't understand. Perhaps he was right. Or perhaps he just never wanted me to. The fear was constant, a low hum beneath the surface of everything. Some nights, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, his mocking words echoing in the darkness. You'll never survive without me, was this it? Was this the slow, humiliating descent he'd envisioned for me? The carefully curated life, now reduced to selling trinkets to keep the wolves from the door. The shame was a constant companion, but beneath it, something else was stirring. A cold, hard anger. He hadn't just left me. He'd tried to destroy me, to prove a point, to feed his monstrous ego. And a small, stubborn voice inside me whispered, no, not like this. The midpoint arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet click of a mouse and a dawning, horrifying clarity. I was deep into my reluctant research of Mark's business world, driven by a strange mix of desperation and a burgeoning, almost academic, curiosity. I'd spent weeks sifting through online articles, shareholder reports I barely understood, and a few stray documents he'd carelessly left behind in his hasty departure. Most of it was impenetrable corporate speak. But then I stumbled upon a series of local news articles from a few years back, detailing a rather hostile takeover Benson Holdings had orchestrated. A smaller, family-run company, swallowed whole. The details were dry, but the accompanying photos showed the grim faces of the former owners. There was something in their eyes that resonated with my own despair. And then I saw it, a name, buried deep in the list of minor shareholders who had initially resisted the takeover. Abernathy Solutions. My mother's maiden name was Abernathy. My maternal grandfather, a man I barely knew, had run a small but respected consultancy firm. He'd passed away years ago, and my mother, estranged from her own family after marrying my father against their wishes, rarely spoke of them. I'd always assumed Abernathy Solutions had dissolved with him. A quick search. Abernathy Solutions was still very much alive and thriving. Bigger now, diversified, involved in strategic acquisitions and corporate restructuring. My uncle, Michael Abernathy, my mother's younger brother, was listed as its CEO. Michael. I remembered him as a quiet, intense young man from a handful of awkward family gatherings in my childhood, before the rift became a chasm. He'd always been sharp, observant. My mother, when she occasionally mentioned him, spoke of his formidable intellect with a mixture of pride and regret for their lost connection. A sudden, wild thought sparked in my mind, so audacious it almost made me laugh. Could they help? What would they even say? I was the daughter of the woman who had walked away, now the discarded wife of a man who likely represented everything they stood against in business, the ruthless, impersonal corporate raider. Shame washed over me again, hotter this time. How could I possibly approach them, cap in hand, admitting my utter failure, my desperate situation? Mark's voice echoed, "You'll never survive without me," but then, another memory surfaced. My grandfather, on one of those rare visits, looking at me with kind, intelligent eyes. He'd asked me about my schoolwork, about my interests. He'd listened, truly listened, unlike Mark. He told me once, "Sarah, never let anyone make you feel small. Your mind is a keen instrument. Learn to wield it." I hadn't thought of those words in years. My mind, a keen instrument. Mark had done his best to blunt it, to convince me it was good for nothing but choosing drapes and planning menus. For the first time, a different kind of anger surged through me, not just at Mark, but at myself for letting my own light dim for so long. The fear was still there, but now it was tinged with something new, a fragile, hesitant resolve. I found the main contact number for Abernathy Solutions. My finger hovered over the call button for what felt like an eternity. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about reclamation. Of myself. Of my dignity. Taking a deep breath, a breath that felt like the first real one I'd taken in weeks, I pressed call. The impersonal, professional voice of the receptionist answered. Abernathy Solutions. How may I direct your call? My voice, when it finally came, was shaky but clear. I'd like to speak to Michael Abernathy, please. Tell him Sarah Benson is calling. Sarah? Abernathy. Benson. The silence on the other end of the line after I announced myself felt like an eternity. I imagined switchboards buzzing, confused whispers. Sarah Abernathy Benson. The name itself was a paradox, a collision of two worlds. Then, a new voice, calm and measured. Please hold for Mr. Abernathy, more waiting, my heart hammering against my ribs. What was I doing? This was insane. Mark would laugh himself sick if he knew. Then, a voice I vaguely remembered, deeper now, but still with that undercurrent of quiet intensity. Sarah? Is that really you? Michael. Uncle Michael. There was no judgment in his voice, only a carefully neutral surprise. Yes, Michael. It's me. The words tumbled out then, a torrent of humiliation, fear, and a desperate, flickering hope. I told him everything. Mark's departure, his cruel words, the frozen accounts, the looming bills, my pathetic attempts to stay afloat. I spared no detail of my degradation, my helplessness. I expected condescension, perhaps a polite dismissal. Instead, there was a thoughtful silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was still calm, but there was a new edge to it, something steely. Mark Benson, he said, the name tasting like ash. Yes, we're familiar with his business practices, an understatement I sensed. Sarah, he continued, What he's done is unconscionable. Legally, morally reprehensible. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel entirely alone. I don't know what to do. I confessed, the fight draining out of me again. He said I wouldn't survive. He's making sure of it. Michael was quiet for a moment. Then, he underestimates you, Sarah. And perhaps, a pause. He underestimates the Abernethus. A tiny spark ignited within me. He asked me to send him details, any documents I had, any information about Mark's businesses, his assets, his current financial situation, anything I gleaned from my reluctant research. Don't worry about whether it seems relevant, he said. Send everything for the next few days. I became an archaeologist of my own failed marriage, digging through the remnants of Mark's life, our life. Old financial statements I'd filed away, brochures for Benson Holdings, even notes I'd taken during those rare occasions he deigned to talk about his work, usually in boastful monologues. I scanned and emailed everything, a mountain of data. Michael called back a few days later. This is interesting, Sarah. Very interesting. Mark Benson has been aggressive, over-leveraged in several key areas. He spread thin. Cocky, there was a new tone in Michael's voice now, the unmistakable sound of a predator scenting weakness. He explained that Benson Holdings, for all its bluster, had vulnerabilities. Complex debt structures, risky ventures that were draining resources, a reliance on a carefully cultivated image of invincibility. He projects strength, Michael said, but the foundations are shakier than he lets on, especially if market sentiment turns against him, or if certain pressures are applied. I still didn't fully grasp the complexities, but I understood the implication. Mark wasn't the untouchable titan he portrayed. He could be hurt. Michael then said something that made my breath catch. Sarah, your mother and we haven't been close. That's a regret I carry. But you are family. And we don't let family get bullied, he paused. We're going to help you. Not just to survive, Sarah. We're going to help you fight back. The words were like a lifeline. But it wasn't just about being rescued. Michael started asking me questions, not about my feelings, but about Mark. His habits, his ego, his blind spots. What drove him? What were his biggest fears, aside from financial ruin? He fears irrelevance, I said, the answer coming to me with sudden clarity. Being seen as a failure. Being ordinary and his pride. Michael pressed. It's colossal, I admitted. He genuinely believes he's smarter, better than everyone else. He doesn't see threats from people he considers beneath him, like me, I thought. Michael hummed thoughtfully. That kind of arrogance, Sarah, can be a powerful weapon against him. The calls with Michael became more frequent. He was patient, explaining complex financial concepts in simple terms. He sent me articles to read, taught me to look for the stories hidden within the numbers. My little hobby of managing spreadsheets suddenly felt like basic training for a much larger campaign. The fear didn't vanish, but it was now overlaid with a cold, focused anger, and a dawning sense of purpose. I was no longer just a victim. I was becoming a participant. The crisis wasn't over. Far from it. The bills were still piling up. Mark was still out there, probably congratulating himself on his clean break, his successful culling of a liability. He had no idea what was brewing. He had no idea that the woman he dismissed as incapable of survival was now poring over his company's financials with the CEO of a rival firm, a firm run by the very family he likely disdained as old money, out of touch. The irony was not lost on me. Just as a sliver of hope began to pierce through my despair, Mark seemed to sense a shift. Perhaps my silence, my lack of begging or desperate calls, unnerved him. Or perhaps his own complications were escalating. He started a new kind of offensive, more insidious, more personal. Whispers began to circulate among the remnants of our social circle, whispers that painted me as unhinged, grasping, emotionally unstable. Someone mentioned to a mutual acquaintance that I'd been making strange inquiries about Mark's business, implying I was delusional or vindictive. He was poisoning the well, ensuring that if I did try to reach out for help beyond my newfound family connection, no one would believe me. The narrative was clear. Mark, the long-suffering husband, finally forced to leave his erratic wife. It was clever, cruel, and terrifyingly effective. My already fragile support system outside of Michael began to evaporate. Invitations dried up completely. Sympathetic calls ceased. I was truly an island. Then came the legal letters. Formal, cold documents from a high-powered law firm outlining Mark's terms for the divorce. They were brutal. He offered a pittance of a settlement, contingent on my signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that would gag me forever. He wanted the house, of course. All major assets. He was, the letter implied, being generous, considering my lack of contribution to the marital wealth. My lack of contribution. The years of silent support, of managing his home, his social life, of being the bedrock that allowed him to build his empire, all dismissed in a single, callous phrase. I showed the letter to Michael. His response was a quiet, expected. He's trying to intimidate you into folding quickly. He doesn't want scrutiny, but the pressure was immense. The thought of a protracted legal battle, of having my life and sanity dissected in court by Mark's expensive lawyers, was sickening. Doubts gnawed at me. Was I strong enough for this? Was I deluding myself, thinking I could fight him, this man who had controlled every aspect of my life for so long? One evening, the power was cut off. I had scraped together enough for a partial payment, but it wasn't enough. I sat in the darkness, the silence of the big house pressing in on me, lit only by the cold glow of my phone screen. Mark's words echoed, louder this time, more insistent. "You'll never survive without me." Maybe he was right. Maybe this elaborate plan with Michael was a fantasy, a pipe dream. I was just Sarah, the quiet wife, playing at being a businesswoman. Tears welled up, hot and bitter. I was so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being scared, tired of the constant ache of betrayal. I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Mark and I in happier times, or what I had believed were happier times. His arm around me, smiling for the camera. Had any of it been real? Or was I always just a prop in his grand performance? The despair was a heavy cloak, threatening to smother the last embers of my resolve. All seemed lost. He was too powerful, too ruthless. I was outmatched, outmaneuvered. The image of the grim-faced former owners of the company Mark had taken over flashed in my mind. Was that my fate? To be another casualty of Mark Benson's relentless ambition? The thought of capitulating, of signing his papers and just disappearing, was almost seductive. An end to the struggle. An end to the pain. But then, another image. My grandfather's kind eyes, his words about my keen mind. Michael's steady voice. "He underestimates you." Was I going to let Mark win? Was I going to let him define me by his contempt? The darkness in the room felt absolute, but slowly, a different feeling began to push through the despair. A cold, hard fury. He would not break me. He would not have the satisfaction of seeing me crawl back, defeated. This wasn't just about money or survival anymore. This was about my soul. The turning point wasn't a single, dramatic event, but a slow, hardening resolve forged in the crucible of Mark's escalating cruelty and my own deepening desperation. Sitting there in the dark, the overdue notices a mocking testament to my predicament. Something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't a collapse into despair, but a fracture that let in a sliver of cold, hard light. Mark's campaign to discredit me, his attempts to starve me into submission, they weren't the actions of a confident man. They were the tactics of a bully, someone who feared exposure, someone who knew, perhaps unconsciously, that his empire was built on a less than stable foundation. His overconfidence, his belief in my utter helplessness, was his Achilles heel. Michael had been feeding me information, not just about Benson Holdings' financials, but about Mark's known associates, his lenders, the subtle power dynamics within his business circles. He'd encouraged me to think strategically, to use the knowledge I possessed as his wife, knowledge Mark himself had always dismissed as trivial. "What does he value above all else, Sarah?" Michael had asked during one of our late-night calls, my voice hoarse from stress, his calm and methodical. His reputation, I'd answered without hesitation. His image as an infallible business genius. He can't stand to look weak or foolish, exactly, Michael had replied. And what's the one thing that could tarnish that image irrevocably? Financial failure was obvious, but Michael was guiding me towards something more nuanced. It was the idea of being outsmarted, outmaneuvered, especially by someone he'd written off. The next morning, I called Michael. My voice was different. The tremor was gone, replaced by a chilling calmness that surprised even myself. "Michael," I said, "I'm done being a victim. I want to understand everything, not just the basics. I want to know how we can dismantle him." There was a pause on the other end, and then I heard something akin to respect in his voice. "All right, Sarah. Let's get to work." The following weeks were an immersion. My dusty, forgotten art studio became a war room. Instead of canvases, the walls were covered with charts, corporate structures, debt timelines, lists of key personnel in Mark's companies. My meticulousness, once reserved for household accounts, was now applied to dissecting Benson Holdings. Michael and his team at Abernathy Solutions were the strategists, the financial heavyweights, but I became their secret weapon, the insider with a decade's worth of seemingly innocuous observations. I remembered names Mark had dropped in passing, casual remarks about difficult partners or overextended loans. I recalled his anxieties during certain market downturns, his triumphant boasts about deals that, in retrospect, seemed suspiciously easy. Each piece of information, however small, was a potential piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just about financial warfare. Michael understood Mark's psychology. "We don't just want to wound him, Sarah," he explained. "We want him to know it was you." The plan began to take shape, audacious and complex. It wasn't a hostile takeover in the traditional sense. That would be too public, too messy, and Mark would fight it tooth and nail, using every dirty trick in his arsenal. No, this had to be quieter, more insidious. A death by 1,000 cuts, orchestrated from the shadows, hitting him where he was most vulnerable, where his ego resided. Abernathy Solutions, through a series of carefully constructed shell corporations and discrete third-party intermediaries, began to acquire strategic stakes in companies that were crucial to Mark's operations, key suppliers, essential service providers, even entities that held significant portions of his debt. They exploited the complications Mark had alluded to, the very vulnerabilities he'd tried to hide. Each move was precise, almost surgical, designed to create maximum leverage with minimum visibility. My role was to provide the human intelligence, the subtle insights that financials alone couldn't reveal. I knew which of Mark's executives were disgruntled, which ones felt undervalued. Michael's team used that information, subtly, to sow further discord, to gather more intelligence. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but now it was channeled into a relentless focus. I was sleeping less, eating sporadically, fueled by coffee and a burning desire for not revenge, exactly. Justice. Vindication. The chance to look Mark Benson in the eye and see his arrogant facade crumble. The decision to confront fate, to not just survive but to actively dismantle the source of my torment, had transformed me. The pale, frightened woman was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone with ice in her veins and a clear, unwavering purpose. Mark thought he was playing chess with a pawn. He had no idea he was facing a queen, backed by an entire army he never saw coming. The day arrives cloaked in an ordinary Tuesday morning light, the kind of mundane sky that belies the seismic shifts happening beneath the surface. I'm in a small, discreet office Abernathy Solutions uses for sensitive meetings, not their main headquarters. The room is functional, impersonal, a far cry from the opulent, ego-driven spaces Mark inhabits. Michael sits beside me, a bastion of calm, though I can see a flicker of anticipation in his eyes. On the large screen before us, a series of financial dashboards and communication logs are displayed. For weeks, the pressure has been mounting on Benson Holdings. Key credit lines suddenly tightening. Important contracts mysteriously falling through or being renegotiated on unfavorable terms. Whispers of instability, once dismissed, now gaining traction in financial circles. Mark, I know from carefully leaked information via once loyal, now turned executives, is frantic. His legendary cool has been replaced by tirades and desperate scrambles to plug holes that keep appearing faster than he can manage. He suspects a coordinated attack, a corporate raid, but he can't pinpoint the source. The moves are too subtle, too spread out, coming from too many unexpected directions. He's lashing out, blaming everyone, blind to the puppet master pulling the strings, a puppet master he himself created through his arrogance and cruelty. Today is the day the final pieces of the puzzle click into place. Abernathy Solutions, through its network of entities, has quietly secured controlling interest or significant leverage over the core assets of Benson Holdings. Not everything, not yet, but enough. Enough to deliver the killing blow. My phone, a new burner phone Michael insisted I use, buzzes with an encrypted message. He's requested an emergency meeting with his primary lenders. He's trying to restructure. He's desperate, that's the signal. Michael makes a call, his voice low and devoid of emotion. Proceed. On the screen, we see a cascade of notifications. Stock prices for publicly traded Benson entities begin to dip, then slide. News alerts flicker across financial wires. Benson Holdings facing unprecedented liquidity crisis. Market confidence in Benson erodes. It's happening. The empire Mark built, the one he lorded over me, is crumbling. And then, the call I've been waiting for, steeling myself for, comes through to Michael's secure line. It's Mark's lead attorney, his voice strained. He's requesting a meeting. Not with his lenders this time. With the anonymous consortium that has, in the space of a few hours, effectively seized control of his destiny. Michael looks at me, a silent question. I nod. Tell them the representative of the consortium will meet Mr. Benson. Here. In 1 hour, the next hour is the longest of my life. I change into the simple, dark suit Michael's assistant had ready for me. It's a uniform of sorts, armor for the battle ahead. I look at my reflection. The fear is still there, a faint tremor deep inside, but it's overshadowed by a cold, hard resolve. This isn't Sarah, the timid wife. This is Sarah Abernathy Benson, a name that now holds a power Mark could never have conceived. He arrives exactly on time, flanked by 2 grim-faced lawyers. He looks diminished. His usually impeccable suit seems rumpled, his hair slightly askew. There are dark circles under his eyes. He strides into the room, scanning for the powerful men he expects to face, the titans of industry who could bring him to his knees. His gaze sweeps past me, dismissing me as a secretary, an assistant, someone utterly irrelevant. Michael stands. Mr. Benson, thank you for coming. Mark's eyes fix on Michael, a flicker of recognition, then confusion. Abernathy? What are you doing here? Who are you representing? Michael smiles, a thin, humorless expression. I'm here in an advisory capacity. The principal representative of the consortium that now holds a controlling interest in your former portfolio is here. He gestures, not to himself, but to me. I step forward. Mark's head turns. He sees me, really sees me, and for a fraction of a second, there's nothing. Just blank incomprehension. Then his eyes widen, a slow, dawning horror spreading across his features. His jaw slackens. The color drains from his face, leaving it a sickly, mottled gray. He looks from me to Michael and back to me again, as if he's trapped in a nightmare, unable to process the reality before him. Sarah, he whispers, the name a question, an accusation a plea. What is this? Some kind of joke. His voice cracks. The arrogance, the confidence, it's all gone, stripped away, leaving behind a raw, bewildered panic. No joke, Mark, I say, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. It's just business. I use his own dismissive tone, the one he'd used on me so many times. His eyes dart around the room, looking for an escape, for an explanation that makes sense in his world, a world where I am nothing. He finally chokes out a strangled sound. You did this?
How?
The question hangs in the air, heavy with his disbelief, his shattered ego. You said I'd never survive without you, Mark. I remind him, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of all his past dismissals. You said I wouldn't understand business in a million years. Turns out, I'm a faster learner than you thought. Especially with the right teachers. I glance at Michael, who gives a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Mark stares at me, his face a mask of utter devastation. The man who had mocked me, dismissed me, tried to crush me, is now standing before me, broken, his empire in ruins, acquired by the family of the woman he deemed worthless. He opens his mouth, then closes it again. No words come. He just freezes. His hands, which once gestured with such authority, hang limply at his sides. The silence in the room is absolute, broken only by his ragged breathing. His lawyers look stunned, exchanging horrified glances. This isn't how it was supposed to go. This isn't in their playbook. But why? He finally manages, his voice barely audible. Why would you do this? I could tell him about the pain, the humiliation, the fear. I could tell him about the nights I lay awake, his words a poison in my veins. But I don't. I simply look at him, my expression unreadable. You underestimated me, Mark. I say softly. You underestimated my family. You built your kingdom on arrogance and assumptions. And now, it's gone, the finality of it settles over him. He sags, all the fight draining out of him. The Titan has fallen. And the woman he swore couldn't survive without him is the one who orchestrated his demise. The smirk he wore when he'd uttered those fateful words is a distant memory. Now, there's only the hollow look of a man who has lost everything, not just his money, but his very identity, at the hands of the person he despised the most. He looks smaller, pathetic. The gun he pointed at my future had, in a spectacular twist of fate, turned back on himself, fired by a hand he never imagined could pull a trigger. The aftermath isn't the explosion of triumphant joy I might have once imagined. It's quieter, more complex. Mark Benson is a broken man. His appeals, his desperate legal maneuvers all fail. Abernathy Solutions, with me now playing a quiet but acknowledged role on their advisory board for this specific portfolio, officially restructures what was Benson Holdings. Some parts are sold off, others absorbed and revitalized under new, ethical management. The name Benson Holdings is wiped from the corporate landscape, a footnote in financial history. Mark loses everything, the businesses, the houses, the illusion of his own genius. He becomes a ghost in the financial world, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. He tries to fight, of course. His lawyers make noise about coercion, about undue influence, painting me as a vindictive shrew. But the paper trail, meticulously assembled by Michael's team, is irrefutable. Every transaction is legal, every move strategically sound. Mark's bluster and threats are met with cold, hard facts. His reputation, the thing he valued above all, is in tatters. He is no longer Mark Benson, the Midas man. He is Mark Benson, the man who is outmaneuvered by his supposedly helpless wife. For me, life transforms. The suffocating fear is gone, replaced by a quiet strength I never knew I possessed. I don't take over Mark's empire. That was never the goal. Instead, I work with Michael and his team, learning the intricacies of the businesses we now control, ensuring they are run responsibly. My keen mind, as my grandfather called it, finally has a purpose beyond balancing household budgets. I rediscover my love for art, not as a hobby, but as a passion. I enroll in that art history course and then another. The spare room in the modest, comfortable apartment I move into, a place that is entirely mine, slowly transforms into a real studio. Canvases line the walls, vibrant with color. There's a bittersweetness to it all. The end of my marriage, the betrayal, those scars remain. They are a part of my story, a reminder of the darkness I walked through.
But they no longer define me.
Mark's mocking words, "You'll never survive without me," still echo sometimes, but now they sound hollow, ridiculous. I did survive.
I thrived.
I won. Not just by taking his business, but by reclaiming myself. The victory isn't just in his downfall, but in my ascent. There's a profound, almost cold satisfaction in knowing that his greatest mistake wasn't a bad investment or a misjudged market trend. It was underestimating me. He saw a reflection of his own disdain and never bothered to look closer at the woman who stood silently by his side for all those years, observing, learning, and ultimately enduring. I see my mother more now. The reconciliation is hesitant at first, layered with years of unspoken words, but the shared experience of dealing with the fallout of Mark's actions and Michael's unwavering support bridges the gap. We are, slowly, rebuilding our own family portfolio, one built on trust and mutual respect, not dominance and dismissal. Sometimes, I wonder if Mark ever truly understands what happened, how the woman he deemed so insignificant could orchestrate such a complete reversal of fortune. Perhaps not. His ego was always his blind spot. But I understand. I understand that survival isn't just about breathing. It's about dignity, purpose, and the quiet, unyielding power of a spirit that refuses to be extinguished. He tried to write my story as a tragedy, a pathetic footnote to his grand narrative. Instead, I rewrote it as a story of resilience, of unexpected strength, and ultimately, of a victory far sweeter than simple revenge. It's the victory of becoming who I was always meant to be. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to find strength you didn't know you possessed, I'd love to hear your version in the comments. And if you feel so inclined, subscribing helps me bring more of these narratives to life. Thank you for being here, for listening.